Welcome to week 8. This week we'll be going back in time as opposed to jumping forward and following a strictly chronological approach. This week we're looking at William James, who is sometimes thought of as strictly a philosopher. Other times he's thought of as a founding father of experimental psychology, particularly the psychology of emotion. Regardless, his thoughts, his theorizing about the nature of consciousness and the experience of emotion and thought and behavior are pretty foundational. So we need to really think about his place in this wider scope of how personality grows, develops, and functions. I remember reading William James as an undergraduate and later as a graduate student, and I found his original work to be very challenging and difficult in some ways to understand, in part because I didn't have a lot of background in philosophy. That said, your authors give you a pretty straightforward way of approaching William James' work and his importance. James, he's also known for his commentary and his thinking about education and the way education might work. He's also noted for being very strict about the approach taken to prove things or to demonstrate things. He was considered an empiricist, meaning that he believed you had to form hypotheses and make observations and only base your beliefs on those observations. So he was very particular about the kinds of data that he was willing to tolerate in his thinking and his theorizing. So in many ways, he's thought of as a foundational thinker in the experimental approach to psychology. So what you're going to be taking away with William James, and part of why I think he's stuck here in the middle of your textbook, it's kind of a transition away from the psychoanalytic thinkers that we've been studying so far and moving in the direction of opening up more space for conversation about cognition and emotion, which were often surprisingly kind of left out of the personality models we've been exploring so far. With the exception of anxiety and fear, you don't get a lot of conversation about emotion. Especially not as a topic of scientific study, like what is emotion, where does it come from, how does it influence behavior, and so on. So, putting William James kind of in this space in your chapter is transitional for us. We'll start moving in the direction of talking about behavioral approaches, more cognitive approaches, before we then kind of pull the circle back around and move toward humanistic approaches.